For centuries, people have asked the same question. If Adam and Eve were the first humans, what happened to their daughters? The Bible speaks clearly about Cain, Abel, and Seth, but remains strangely silent about the women born from the first family. Yet ancient texts, forgotten manuscripts, and early Jewish traditions reveal a story far more complex and far more mysterious than anything taught in Sunday school. Today, you're going to hear the forgotten history of the daughters of Adam and Eve, not the sanitized version, but the uncomfortable truth hidden between the lines of Scripture, preserved in fragments of ancient writings that few have ever read. Because once you hear this story, you will never look at the book of Genesis the same way again. The biblical narrative begins with simplicity. Adam and Eve, placed in the Garden of Eden, living in a perfect world with no death and no violence. But after the fall, after the exile, everything changed. Their lives became marked by struggle, pain, and the weight of a world spiritually fractured. Yet Genesis says something subtle, something people easily miss. Adam and Eve had sons and daughters. That single phrase hides an entire generation, perhaps multiple generations, of children whose names and lives were never recorded. They existed, but their stories were erased. Ancient Jewish traditions, including the Book of Jubilees and early rabbinic commentary, fill in the gaps. According to these texts, Adam and Eve had many daughters. Some say 9, some say 30, some say over 50, born across the long centuries of their lives. One of the earliest daughters mentioned is Awan, said to be the sister paired with Cain. Another is Azura, described as the sister later paired with Seth. These names did not appear in the Bible, yet they appear repeatedly in ancient manuscripts that were considered authoritative by early communities. Why were their names removed? Why were their stories buried? And why does almost every ancient culture outside the Bible preserve tales of forgotten first women, the mothers of nations, the keepers of hidden knowledge? One explanation is simple. In patriarchal societies, genealogies traditionally followed the male line. Sons were recorded, daughters were not. But another explanation, a more mysterious one, emerges from apocryphal writings. According to some traditions, the daughters of Adam and Eve played a central role in the early spread of humanity, serving not just as wives, but as carriers of knowledge, culture, and spiritual understanding. Imagine for a moment the world these women lived in, a world untouched by civilization, yet filled with memories of Eden, a memory their parents carried with them every day. Adam and Eve had walked with God. They had heard his voice directly. They had seen things no human would ever see again. And their daughters grew up hearing these stories firsthand. What did those daughters believe? What did they know? What knowledge did they inherit that has now been lost? Some traditions say the daughters were extraordinarily intelligent, beautiful, and physically strong. Not in a superficial sense, but as a natural result of living closer to humanity's original design. Their bodies were not weakened by centuries of degeneration. Their minds were sharp, intuitive, and deeply connected to the spiritual world. This may explain something strange that appears repeatedly in ancient mythology. Powerful first women who guided cities, ruled regions, or interacted with divine beings. These stories appear in Mesopotamia, Egypt, Africa, and even early Greek traditions. Different names, same pattern, always pointing back toward the earliest generations of humankind. Now imagine Cain, tormented, marked, exiled, and the sister who walked into exile with him. Ancient traditions describe Awan not as a passive woman, but as someone who stood by Cain, helped him build the first city, and gave rise to the earliest dynasties. Some writings suggest she had prophetic dreams, warning Cain of dangers before they came. Others say she served as a peacemaker between Cain's descendants, who were known for their violence, ambition, and innovation. The story becomes even more intriguing when we consider Seth, the third son of Adam and Eve, the one born after Abel's death. His sister, Azura, is described in apocryphal texts as gentle, wise, and spiritually sensitive. Seth and Azura's line, according to tradition, preserved the knowledge of God, remaining faithful while Cain's descendants turned toward cities, technology, and earthly power. Some traditions describe the daughters of Adam and Eve as early priestesses, not in the sense of temples or ritual, but as keepers of memory. Adam lived over 900 years. During that time, he taught his children everything he remembered from Eden. The design of creation, the nature of spiritual beings, the laws of purity, the origins of the world. His daughters, according to ancient writings, were the ones who preserved these teachings and passed them down. This idea appears subtly in the Bible itself. In ancient Hebrew culture, women were often the keepers of oral tradition. They sang genealogies. They preserved history. They remembered. And in a world where writing barely existed, memory was power. But not all stories about the daughters of Adam and Eve are peaceful. Some ancient texts describe tensions and divisions among the early tribes, conflicts over leadership, land, and spiritual authority. The earliest generations of humans lived long lives, which means multiple generations overlapped. Imagine hundreds of people living at once, all descended from the same parents, all trying to survive in a harsh world. Some traditions say that one daughter, whose name is lost, rebelled against Adam's teachings and led a group into wilderness, forming one of the first independent tribes. Another tradition speaks of daughters who intermarried with the descendants of Cain, causing friction within Seth's lineage. These stories may be exaggerated or symbolic, but they reveal something important. The early world was far more complex than people imagine. And then comes the most controversial idea of all, one whispered in ancient manuscripts and fiercely debated by scholars. The theory that some of the daughters of Adam and Eve encountered beings described as sons of God, leading to mysterious generation mentioned in Genesis 6. While the Bible only describes this happening later, some ancient traditions suggest these early interactions shaped entire bloodlines and created legends of semi-divine heroes that appear across different cultures. Whether literal or symbolic, these stories highlight a truth people often forget. The daughters of Adam and Eve were not background characters. They were central to the unfolding of early human history. But why were they removed from Scripture? One theory is practical. The Bible focuses on the lineage leading to Israel, and therefore tracks the male lines. But another theory, one far more unsettling, is that their stories were considered too controversial, too mysterious, or too spiritually dangerous for ordinary readers. Ancient scribes preserved only what they believed the community could handle, and the rest was left in scattered manuscripts, guarded by small groups, surviving only through whispers. Yet their legacy remains. Every human alive today descends not just from Adam and Eve, but from their unnamed daughters, women who lived in a world close to perfection, who carried memories of Eden to their parents, who birthed nations, preserved knowledge, and shaped the destiny of humanity. Their silence in Scripture is not absence. It is mystery, an echo of a world long lost, waiting to be rediscovered. And perhaps that's why people still ask the question today. Because deep down, we sense that something important is missing. A chapter torn out, a story half told, a part of our origin deliberately forgotten. But now, you've heard the truth most people never hear. You've seen the pieces scholars keep in footnotes. You've walked into the shadows of the earliest human story. And if you want to uncover more hidden mysteries, more lost histories, more ancient truths buried beneath centuries of silence, make sure you subscribe, because this journey has only just begun.